Welcome back to Oxygen Not Included. Today I've got an experiment for you. So in my last episode here, the Super-Duplicant 7, I built this hydrogen bubbler system. Now it just got up and running. However, that game cannot run very fast because it's got 50 duplicants and all sorts of crazy stuff. So the game runs very, very slow. So in order to get a benchmark or some sort of understanding of whether or not this system is going to work, I have to run more of a test, and that's what today is going to be about, because there's been some questions that you guys have been asking me in the comment section below that video right there. So Travis wants to know if this is going to work. Been waiting to try this, and there's a couple of different things that are a little bit weird about this one. Just like right down here is why there's so many wire bridges in the hydrogen bubbler system, and that is a couple of the questions right here because I've never done that before in one of these systems. So let me explain what's going on here. Up here, there's going to be a lot of morbs. However, there aren't currently morbs. This is a recreation of what's in that other base. Over here is a bunch of hydrogen that I filled up in this space. It's not the most efficient method. We might experiment a little bit more to try to make that a little bit better. However, that's what seemed to fit the area, so that's what I built. The wire bridges is the key to this whole thing working. Now, normally I would have run gas pipes over there using granite and then ran a giant radiator. You've seen this in several videos before if you've watched some of my other hydrogen bubbler systems. However, wire bridges exist in both areas right there. And Wolframite has a very high thermal conductivity of 15. So it will transfer a lot of that energy from one side to the other. So that's what's going on right there. So this should be more efficient at transferring thermal energy than using a bunch of gas pipes. So that's the idea. That's the concept of how this might work better than any other hydrogen bubbler system before it. However, you also got to take into effect that these thermal regulators do need to be cooled in a more realistic method. So what I have here is a bunch of liquid cooling. So down here is a bunch of water that'll pump up and that'll cool the thermal regulators for a little while. And then as liquid oxygen pools up down here, it should go into this area and then boil off, cooling the thermal regulators in the process. At that point, we can then take the gas pump and pump it out and see how much we're getting. So that's the experiment today. We'll take this, we'll kind of see where it ends up, and then we're gonna go ahead and try to optimize it a little bit. So let's go ahead and fire this sucker up. I've already kind of used a cheat engine here to make this battery have a constant amount of power, so I don't have to worry about any sort of power, all that good stuff. All we got to do is start this system up and running, which will happen here at cycle 38. I tell you what, it's nice to see this game running at 60 frames per second again. I've been staring at this thing for the last, I don't know, 10 hours at about 15 frames a second. It's been pretty annoying. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is I need to make sure I get some morbs in this area. So, well, we'll just teleport a couple of my duplicants right up here into this vacuum space and murder them. That's a good way to start off a video, right? Come on, Stinky. Get on up in there. Oh, can we not teleport them? Oh, nope, they do go all at the same time. Come on, May, get up in there. Yeah, this is like the worst way to go. Oh, man, all the farting. Oh, here we go. There we go. All right, so we've reduced the amount of duplicants we have. So now we should have some more morbs in this area. That'll be good, because that'll be necessary once this gets down to temperature. Okay, so we're just starting this thing up here. We can see that we've reduced the gas in here a little bit. You can see how the temperature is starting to move around. So a lot of cold gas is, entering its way back in here. However, these thermal regulators are starting to get hot. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the pump here a little bit, just to add just a few grams a second, just to kind of cool this down. We'll see the temperature really drop here. Now, I know that this was working because in the previous video, well, it was working, right? Okay, so right off the bat, we can see here that this thing hasn't been running even but a half a cycle. And look at how cold this is getting. I mean, it's really moving quick. So one thing I want to make sure is I'm going to keep this a little bit lower. I think I can bring that down quite a bit. Doesn't need to be that high. That will save a little bit of power down here. Yeah, it seems to be working real good. Maybe they could start working on breeding morbs like hatches and puffs after this upgrade. That would actually be kind of cool. If you could find different ones and find a way to capture them and have little farms and stuff. I like that idea. Kind of reminds me of Slime Rancher a little bit. I know that one thing they're going to add here is the ability to type in the number. Can't wait for that. Alright, so I'm one cycle in and look at how cold this has gotten already. One thing I noticed in my previous build is that I still had a gas pipe bridge that was right here. I haven't destroyed that yet. and that was really messing up my ability to cool things down. I think if I go ahead and take this and I make this a granite little pipe, and I do that, let's just see what happens to the temperature with that. You should see that the temperature around here, yeah, so some of that energy is finding its way out over here and not cooling down this gas. The early signs are, though, that this is working really good. I mean, look at this, it's already down to negative 60 degrees Celsius. And look at how cold it is on the left side, like really cold. Alright, so the condensation level of hydrogen is at negative 252 degrees Celsius, and each one of these, according to the description, lowers the cooling factor by negative 14 degrees Celsius. So a safe number to keep this at is right at 200. So negative 200 would be a kind of a safe number. That way I don't end up freezing or liquefying the hydrogen inside of the pipe. That would be a bad thing. Eventually I'll get some orbs out of this, hopefully. I don't want all that death and destruction for nothing. Speaking of which, my last video, for whatever reason, got marked as unfriendly for advertising. I mean, could my videos be more friendly for advertising? Could this be more family friendly? I don't know. Come on, YouTube. Not like it was a big deal. They reviewed it and cleared it, but I don't know. A little bit crazy. All my loadout content is like straight up flagged just because of the game, even though I turned the goer off. I tell you what, the world's gotten far too touchy. There's all kinds of controls that you can put on your advertisement on what it shows up. Like, that should be their problem, not YouTube's problem. Okay, so I started this just 2 cycles ago, and now look at it. We're down to negative 140 degrees Celsius. So that's pretty awesome. You can see, though, that yesterday I used 618 kilojoules. That's quite a bit of power, really. Not huge, not crazy, but it's a lot. Alright, so only 3 cycles in now, and I'm actually getting some liquid oxygen here. So everything's up and running now, so that's pretty cool. We can kind of see that forming now. That didn't take very long at all. The only thing is that it is, well, now it's all oxygen. And now I'd send a duplicant up in here to kind of go in and deconstruct, let's say, this piece right there. And then I would say, or maybe deconstruct pretty much everything that is down here, just as kind of a simulation, right? And then I'd mop that up, right? Mop, 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 mop. Ideally, I'd mop all of this up, and then I'd reinstall the floor, except for this one would actually just go away. So now that liquid oxygen is going to flow into this area, and it's going to get really, really cold. Oh, but I forgot to turn that off, so I got to make sure I do that. Make sure I disable that pump. But yeah, we can see just how cold this is now. So the next step, even though I don't have a power transformer on top of it, would be to deconstruct these pieces right here just to let the polluted oxygen in. So now let's see what happens. Just to give us an idea of where we're at, though, I spent about 3 cycles, each one at about 650 kilojoules of power, or just above 600. So starting from cycle 38, that was 381 kilojoules, 618, 649, just to give you an idea of how much power that was to get it down to temperature. And then 293, I guess, a little bit more there. So not bad. So now that I've deconstructed this, let's see what happens. So that goes away. I guess what I'd have to do is I'd have to put in some permeable tile up here, just in, even though that wouldn't necessarily be there. I should get some polluted oxygen here, and the temperature in this area should start to go. I should continue to end up with liquid oxygen, even though it's not quite cooling far enough. It is getting colder, though. What's going on here? Alright, so it's just tripped the temperature for the thermal switch over here, so this should start to run again a little bit more. Get these thermoregulators down. Now this is where it's going to get weird, right? The amount of energy that's going into this, I mean, it's going to cool, but it's also going to produce what's going to cool itself. So I don't know if a thermoregulator in this situation is going to be self-cooling. I doubt it. I kind of doubt it. The other thing is I do have a mechanized airlock over here. Now my initial plan was to do this number and just cut that door off. Like, you only need to get in there to do the whole pump thing, so I'll just cut that off, take that variable out of it. Let's see if this just overheats. There's a good chance it might. Okay, so one thing that's going on here that isn't the same between my game and this game, this test currently, is the temperature of the gas that's up here. It's much closer to 30 degrees Celsius. So I've cooled it down a little bit. All right, so we can see that the thermal regulators here, they're continuing to get really hot. And the oxygen over here is kind of refusing to cool down. I mean, it's at 150 degrees Celsius, but it's not dropping down lower. Come on! So what's really happening is a lot of this cold is starting to go up in this area. All by itself, you know? It's not going where it needs to go. So I think I'm going to go ahead and deconstruct one of those blocks there. Get rid of that. And just let it be one tile in, right? So just like this. So just one gas permeable tile. You can see I'm starting to get some overheat damage on the thermal regulators because I turned the pump off. We'll see if it melts down before I produce any sort of liquid oxygen here. Alright, so we can see here the real struggle of what's going on. So the oxygen over here on the left isn't exposed to any of these wire bridges. So it's really struggling to get cold enough. However, every once in a while the oxygen over here on the right is getting cold enough to turn into liquid oxygen. But I'm not getting my liquid lock effect that I really need because I'm not getting enough liquid oxygen out of this. Now, part of the problem here is that this mesh tile is not cold enough to keep the liquid oxygen, well, cold. It's a little bit warmer, so every time the liquid oxygen finds its way down here, it just instantly boils off. So that's part of the problem. So it might be in my best interest to just deconstruct that. So that's what I'll do. Okay, so the problem I'm still having is that I'm just not getting that liquid lock effect. I need that. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it 2 spots here to see if that liquid oxygen will hopefully settle into something that's going to work there. So we're starting to tweak it just a little bit. I can also see that the temperature is just too high on these pumps. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to cool it off with a little bit of water. I've re-enabled this pump down here. Okay, so this is continuing to struggle quite a bit here. Let me just try to do a couple of more tweaks here, just to see if I can get that working right. We'll put gas permeable on this side, and then insulated on that side, to see if that changes up anything. Alright, this is still struggling to work. I mean, I like the idea, right? But it's not going too well. So now it's getting so cold over here that some of the morbs just can't stand it. And they're starting to die, which is what I kind of feared would happen. Alright, here we go. Now I've got some liquid oxygen built up here. And now things seem to be sticking around. Alright, let's see how this works now. So now the amount of oxygen that's in this area should be going down, right? And the pressure over here should be going up. Look at that. Now it's over 2 kilograms over there. Yeah, there we go. That's what I wanted to see. So let me turn off the pump. Oh, but then the liquid oxygen went away. And that forces all that oxygen right back up into this area. Oh man, everything's gotten super cold in here. I'm gonna turn this entire thing into an icebox before I create liquid oxygen. Alright, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. This is not working. It was a fun idea, but it's not working. Alright, so now I'm gonna start tweaking a little bit. Let's go ahead and change the dynamic here. So now, it's just gonna be one single way up or down, right? So it should want to travel down because it's gonna be creating cold. And then that should puddle up quite a bit down here. That's the hopes. So now, since there's only one way to go, it's gotta go down, right? It's the temperature of that oxygen. This should work a little bit better. I'm hoping. Fingers crossed, right? Yeah, there we go. I'm seeing some liquid oxygen there. Hey, alright. So now, it seems to be working quite a bit better now. Look at all that oxygen in here. So now that number keeps going up, even higher and higher. So now I'm over 2 kilograms in a lot of these spaces here. So this pump should turn on. That'll lower the gas pressure. Kind of see it moving there. Good stuff. All right. Just as long as this liquid sticks around, right? Don't run away on me. Oh, you did. All right, so I think I'm really close, but my problem here is that, you know, this thing turns off and it doesn't continue to go, and it doesn't continue to get colder and colder, and then I'm still running 3 thermal regulators. I think at this point, the same point that I go and I do all this other movement down here, I should really just go down to 1 thermal regulator rather than still trying to run 3. So what that means is this will come in, and then I'll just add a piece of pipe right there, and then I'll get rid of this chunk of pipe right there. So now the gas system should just go through 1 thermal regulator. It's going to make the loop smaller, it's going to use less power, and it should allow this to go quite a bit colder without, you know, breaking. Alright, you can see the oxygen is now continuing to go up, right? And the system is still running, so it's not turning off. And I think that's really stabilized everything. So look at that, 1,900 is now going to get up to 2 kilograms. Come on. Very nearly. Oh, but it all boiled off. Like, that's... why does it do that? Okay, so now I've run into a wall. This oxygen just will not go down past 160 degrees Celsius. I simply don't have enough power to drive it down there. And if you look at this gas valve, you can see the average flow rate is only about 250 grams a second. So this pump is not getting a full draw. And so you can see that I kind of messed around if you watched my other video, trying to expand this area a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do now. But since I have some easier, you know, better tools to make this happen, let's see what happens when I deconstruct some of this and see if I can get a little bit more flow through it. So yeah, look at the average flow now. Now it's 490 some, so that's made a big difference, which is actually max. So I'll go ahead and increase that all the way. Okay, so even with all that, I still don't have enough cooling going on. So let's just reconnect this, and then I'll bypass this one. So just the last one. Alright, I'm finally starting to see some liquid oxygen down here. We'll see if it'll stay down there, or if it'll start to, you know, bounce back up. Alright, so I'm starting to build up a little bit of liquid oxygen over here. So that's good. You can see just how many kilograms I'm getting there. About 40 kilograms that day. So things are starting to build up. This is actually working, and they're actually starting from these little crevices over here. So that seems to be a pretty good idea, right? So it gets cold enough there, and then it kind of like seeds everything else. Okay, so a couple of things that I'm playing with right here is I'm playing with how much water is flowing into this area. I'm actually turning that up a little bit. I've also added a hydro switch so that this thing isn't constantly running. And I think that would, you know, that makes this really efficient, this liquid cooling system. So the pump, even though it looks like it's constantly running, if you look down here, it's really just not running at all. It pumps a lot faster than what I'm drawing out of it. And this pump down here also doesn't run until a decent amount of liquid builds up down here. So I'm actually, you know, moving a lot of heat this way without, you know, really using much energy. I think in turn, that's really meaning there's a lot less energy finding its way back out of here. So hopefully that'll all work out. The amount of liquid oxygen continues to build up down here. I want to have a nice reserve of liquid oxygen before it tries to go and flow this way. Hopefully that will kind of help seed it and kind of help create a little bit of a buffer zone, so that the liquid oxygen doesn't just simply boil away and goes, you know, completely disappear on us. This up here seems to be working quite well. You can see a lot of the liquid oxygen is starting in these little cells and then dripping down from there. So I like that. Okay, the other thing I'm starting to see here is that the temperature up top is starting to increase now. So now we're actually moving, you know, we're at least condensing the oxygen down here, so that the only thing left up top is polluted oxygen, which is coming from, well, at least this morb, and then some of the batteries and stuff like that is actually giving off heat into this area. So I might want to move these power transformers again out of the area, but okay, so another notable observation I've made here is that the amount of polluted oxygen up here is now, the density's gone down quite a bit. So it's ending up all condensed down here. I mean, there's like hardly oxygen at this point. Look at how low it is. All right, let's get a little bit more serious with this. Now that I have a system that's up and running, I mean, it may not be all that efficient, but let's go ahead and see where it's at here over the next 5 cycles. So I'm just going to take the amount of oxygen I've started with here. You can see it down there in that one tile to see just how many kilograms of liquid oxygen I'm producing per cycle, and just to see how much energy and whatnot everything's taking, you know, as it stands. All right, so here are the results for this little setup here on the left. Currently, I believe my limiting factor is the amount of morbs and the amount of polluted oxygen that's being created. It's starting to balance right around 200 grams in this area over here, and it's just not flowing in very, very quickly to this cooler. So I think that's where my limiting factor is. I just got to let this run longer, maybe get more morbs in there. But currently, I'm only getting about 37.9 kilograms of oxygen, and that's costing me about 11.2 watts per kilogram of oxygen. So that's averaged out. So that's kind of what I got going on there, about 255 kilojoules a day. You see here though that there was one really high day and then another high day, then a couple of lower ones. So I'm not sure where all that's going, but right now the test is a little bit inconsistent. And I would say though that I think my limiting factor though is just that morb. So it's not completely set, you know, set in stone, but this is where things are currently. All right, I've only got time for one more test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to compensate for my lack of morbs in this setup. So I'm gonna go ahead and just paint in contaminated oxygen, which is polluted oxygen. The two things are still not called the same. I'm just gonna paint that in at 2 kilograms. And it'll just be 2 tiles tall, and that'll be at the start of each cycle here. So that should be lots of contaminated oxygen, and we'll see how that just affects the results right there. So let's see what happens. So just like that, just right there, and then we'll let that flow in, and we'll see what happens. Whoa, look at it go. All right, so now it's ruining my test. It's now 499. Apparently that's the limit. Well, let's see what happens anyhow. I mean, this is kind of what we wanted to see. If there's a lot of contaminated oxygen flowing around, then sweet. Although I can't measure what I'm trying to do now. Okay, so it's slightly a mistake. However, it's working really well. So over here on the left side, what I'm seeing is a large increase in oxygen. I won't be able to measure how much I'm getting out of this thing, but whatever. Doesn't matter. It's actually working. Boom. Look at that. All right, so it balances out right around 850 grams. And you can see it's just sucking it down. That's what I wanted to see. See, now the system's working. It takes 2 thermoregulators, liquid cooled, to kind of keep that running. But look at that. Oxygen's starting to build up now. Good deal. So that pulled it down from 800 to 500 in one cycle right there. So that's a fair amount of, you know, oxygen that's flowed through this thing. That's pretty awesome. So what happens if I just really crank it up, huh? Massive amounts. Let's see what happens. See if we can flood it. Now I'm up to 1,400 up here. Look, it's still just, it's flowing constantly. So now this pump's starting to turn on. I'm starting to get all this oxygen over here on the left. Hey, that's pretty sweet to see. I tell you what, in this next cycle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mop this spot up down here. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. We'll see. Just some sort of idea of how much liquid or how much oxygen I can liquefy, maybe. Oh, here's what I can do. This is what I'll do. I'll go ahead and leave one spot, an extra spot open down here. Oh crap, that electrical wire is gonna mess things up, isn't it? Ah, you see, that kind of forced in a lot of... I think that kind of messed it up. Alright, that seemed to ruin the balance. And if I mop it up, it just has to remain. So that's the key to the liquid lock right there, is keeping that kind of full and then letting it flow out. Alright, so here's my last test. I think I can count this number right here as far as like my second liquid lock. I'll try to keep the polluted oxygen here. I'll just paint in a couple of tiles up here, so about 2 rows of just polluted oxygen in this area at 2 kilograms mass. And we'll see what kind of numbers increase by looking at this right there. That's going to be the closest thing I'm going to have to any sort of real meaningful test here. This game's really been fighting me to, you know, produce any meaningful results here. I don't know. This liquid thing likes to come and go. Whatever. We'll see what happens here. This isn't working either. I'm just like not getting real numbers because half the oxygen over here is just liquefying. I'm sorry, boiling off into this. Like, I just cannot measure this thing. Alright, so it seems like these thermal regulators actually are self-cooling. And the temperature that's coming out on the other end now is actually at a fairly reasonable, like 19 degrees Celsius or so, average. So it's like, it's pretty good. It's getting warmed up a little bit as it goes past the thermal regulator, so you can see right there, that's like 27, but then it quickly drops down. I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing. I mean, it seems it's working. So the only thing I can do now is I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit of water so it cools this down, and do the only thing I can do to actually get any sort of idea of what this system is producing. So I'm going to go ahead and build up this and just kind of count up how much liquid oxygen increases down here. So I have to isolate the two chambers. It's not going to be a complete result of, like, you know, this is what the whole system does, but it'll just be the best I can do. Alright, so for the result of this system over here, let's see what we got. This is it right down here. On average, it's creating 46 kilograms of oxygen a day. So not a huge amount. It's also using quite a bit of energy, but then again, it's also doing a lot of extra pumping that wasn't, you know, used previously. So I'm not sure if that number is really all that accurate compared to like using morbs and stuff like that. At the end of the day, what are my thoughts on this? Well, it's not really producing a lot of oxygen. Since the last update, we are not getting nearly as much like free cooling energy as we used to with that temperature resetting thing with the pipes. I mean, that right there was a real key to just how much, you know, you could actually run a hydrogen bubbler system and just cool a lot of oxygen down for basically free. So the watts per oxygen has gone up quite a bit since that last update, so that's something to, you know, pay attention to. But then again, there's also a lot more power around, so I mean, everything kind of weighs out there. Is this system really practical to build? Well, no, it's not really even enough to make one oxygen enough for one duplicant right there. So I'm not sure if this strategy is really, you know, that great in the long term, but we'll have to see if we can scale it up to something that's a little bit more practical. Currently, the way this is set up right now, it's kind of a fun kind of novelty thing to do, but not really all that practical at all. So that's my results thus far. The one I set up in my base last time, although it is cool, no pun intended, it's probably not really all that practical now that I've seen this, you know, the results from this experiment. Not to mention a little bit, you know, a little tougher to set up than I thought it was going to be. So there's some mods I definitely got to make. At any rate, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys got some recommendations on how to make this stuff work a little bit better, you know, let me know down there in the comment section below. I want to get back to doing some more of these experiments, and definitely once we get to the next update, we're going to have a lot more things to play with. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for all of your support, and continue to stay awesome. Stay awesome, guys. If I've earned your subscription, then thank you so much for that. Peace. Brothgar out.